back. It is Swing Pass. I'm Adam Ruffner. That is Evan Lepler. We are now under 30 days away from the start of the 2025 UFA season. I know I'm just brimming with excitement. Evan, I'm sure you are. We get team kits today. BE Ultimate has announced the full slate of 2025 UFA jerseys. Those are now available in the UFA shop as well as the BE Ultimate shop. Evan, it really feels like we're hitting the ground running here. We've got the look, we've got the feel. Feels like all we need is a Frisbee in play, right?
Yeah, we're recording this on Thursday morning of the last Thursday in March. And, 4 weeks from now, I will be out in the Bay Area getting ready for the Empire and the Spiders. And my opening weekend continues Friday night, the debut of Friday Night Frisbee 2025, the debut of the Vegas Bighorns against the aforementioned Empire. And then my ambitious travel agent is planning to send me to Atlanta for that Salt Lake Atlanta game on Saturday. So, 3 days of Ultimate. I could not be more excited. And the thing I've been thinking about as well, Adam, like once the season starts, and you know this as well as anybody because you're buried in your bunker for so much of the season, it goes by really, really fast. Like it's exhausting. It's exhilarating week by week, game by game. We got 144 of them on the schedule. And yeah, we learned today what jerseys everybody's going to be wearing. And there's some like mostly minor tweaks, but like I just watched the video that UFA and B Ultimate released. Like I really liked all the jerseys. There was one jersey that kind of made me say like, "Whoa, that's different." And do you know what it is? I mean, I'll just tell you. It was the Oakland Spiders because they had these like splotches on the shoulders, and I
Yeah.
liked it, but it was like the biggest variation from what we've seen in the past. And I feel like there's been a lot of subtle tweaks to jerseys, and obviously the Bighorns are new. Obviously, Oregon Steel has a new look, and I like their new look. But yeah, I mean, teams are going to be wearing good looking jerseys, and 4 weeks from now, we're rolling through the end of August.
Yeah, I really like where BE has been rounding a few of these looks into. It feels like there's elements that continue to be just tinkered with at the edges, but then you have like a traditional kind of like Carolina Flyers look. I always like kind of how stately they are in that blue and that red. You've got the Empire in their pinstripes. You've got the Madison Radicals with their lightning bolt. There's really kind of a feel with some of these brands. And it's kind of funny because I feel like, even 6 seasons ago, designs looked a little bit more clip-arty, for lack of a better way to put it, right? Like a little bit of
We've come a long way.
We've come a long way in a lot of regards. The other thing I wanted to touch on really quick was you talking about how quickly the season goes by. I was just talking about this with a friend. It's kind of like going on tour with a band, right? Like you build everything up, or like setting sail on a ship. You kind of build up all this pre-work and get all your stuff in order. And then you're just kind of like out there on the road. I know you especially. I get to sit in my bunker, which is a very apt term for what I do at home every weekend. Bunker down and just watch all the games. But it really is that kind of everything moving forward inertia and just excitement and energy. And then all of a sudden you are kind of just at the end. And it's like, all right, now what do I do for the entire off season? So I know I'm really
Hey,
excited. Go ahead.
I don't know if you've ever like explained to people what when you're not broadcasting a Radicals game, like what is your setup night? If there are 4 or 5 games on a Saturday at the same time and you're not at a Radicals game, do you have like 4 or 5 different screens? Do you have 4 boxes on one screen? How do you monitor everything on a game day?
Neuralink, which brings us to our new sponsored segment. No, I'm absolutely kidding. I'm absolutely kidding. No, it's one of those things where, right, I'm only one human with 2 eyeballs and 1 brain. So I can only intake so much. But I do have, the multi-screen kind of battle station setup. Got my phone, got 2 laptops, usually got another screen going, probably playing sound in the background. I am nothing if not a child of the internet. So just stimuli in 360 degrees around me. And then, yeah, I don't know, man. Like I grew up on sports, so I just kind of like sitting there and getting into it. And it's been one of the things that truly has been so exciting about watching this league develop is that the watchability of the UFA has just gotten so good lately. Like,
Yeah.
again, 5-6 seasons ago, you have your, handful of games at the top of a weekly slate that are really exciting to get into. And then there's kind of that backlog, right? That's not really the case anymore. I mean, you have obviously the kind of game of the week, Friday night Frisbee, top premier headers, but then there's going to be so many good other games. I'm going through footage from 2024, and the games that weren't in prime time are some of the best ones of the season. I think of the week 10 matchup between Minnesota and Chicago that came down to that last second Noah Hansen block. Think about the Oakland and Colorado games in the Bay the past 2 regular seasons. Those have been some of the best finishes we've had in this league's history, but they get a little bit obscured because they're not in the main stage. Suffice it to say, I'm just so excited for this. And I know you've got the kickoff for our segment, which is going to be over-under for team wins heading into the 2025 season.
Yeah, we're going to do over-unders today, and we're going to focus on the teams that had the highest over-unders in the preseason. And Adam, through his connections, reached out to his buddy in Vegas, and just kidding, I created the over-unders. But I put some thought into them, and look, it's more fun to pick the over, I think, generally. So I think I tried to lean a little bit toward over to maybe entice some unders, and if we pick your team under, it doesn't mean you can't win the championship. It just means that the number might be too high. That's one of the things about the balanced landscape this year. The biggest narrative of the preseason across the league is that there are 8, 9, 10, 11, maybe even 12 teams that could compete to actually win the title this year. So I think it's really unlikely someone's going to go 12-0. As you'll see from the over-unders, I think it's unlikely someone's going to go 11-1. But I got 5 teams, Adam. And I don't know if you want to go by division or you want to go by the highest number. But I got 5 teams with the same over-under number that's higher than everybody else. Do you want to go division, or do you want me to just give you these 5 teams that are all 9.5?
Why don't you just pitch them at me? I'm ready. I'm right here at the plate.
All right. Well, let's start alphabetically and what I had first. The Atlanta Hustle, over-under 9.5. They have won double-digit games each of the past 2 seasons. Do they do it for a 3rd year in a row?
See, now, I should have been a little bit more prepared and had the schedule up already before I go and answer this question. Kind of getting back to a point you were almost stretching out before, I don't just think we might not have a 12-win team, an 11-win team. I think double-digit 10-win teams are going to be a scarcity in the 2025 landscape. So when you put this line at 9.5 and then say to me, there's 5 of these teams, I'm really hemming and hawing over here, turning into Daniel, the ultimate hedger, speaking of Vegas. I don't know, man. Like, you look at the top of their schedule, they got week 1, the game you're going to be at, game of the week, hosting Salt Lake. Salt Lake is obviously down a bunch of talent this year, but they're going to be trying to prove themselves in that matchup. I mean, Bryce Merrill is as good of a brigadier general in rallying the troops, and it feels like if that young team can get a W down in the ATL to start off their season, they're going to go like this the rest of the way. So that, I think, is a really tough matchup out of the gate for a Hustle team that's also going to be integrating a fair amount of new pieces, right? Bobby Lay, I think retiring is going to be one of the more interesting storylines to follow throughout the season. Last year, I feel like the kind of presence hanging over the league that determined a lot was the retirement of Cody Spicer from Colorado. Lay feels similar to me, given how important he was in his role on that Hustle offense. So, again, getting back to your question, 9.5 wins, I'm going to get under. I just think this Atlanta team is very good. They've been so good, I think, at putting themselves through a tough schedule the past couple of seasons to get battle toughness. I just don't think that they might place as much importance on the specific win condition of some of these games and instead work a little bit more on developing these lineups. I do think that is maybe where Atlanta has gotten caught up in that balance between we need to win enough regular season games to get a home playoff game, And also, we need to kind of figure out our entire roster too. I'm getting rambly. So again, I'll get back to the point. Atlanta, I'm going to take under at 9.5. What are you taking?
Yeah, I look at this, like I look at their schedule and ask myself, how many games on this schedule do I think they could realistically lose? And
Mm-hmm.
and the answer's like at least seven, maybe eight, depending on, how I feel about San Diego traveling to Atlanta on the second day of a back-to-back, which is, not an easy thing to do. Um, but if there's seven games that they could lose,
It's a
and
lot.
they've got a lot of new pieces. Like I'm not like obviously I'm not predicting that they're going to lose seven games, but I think Cam Brock, Alec Wilson, Holiday, Sean Cannell, likely
Mm.
three new pieces on their O line. We don't have that confirmed, but that's what we expect. And that's just, three guys from different systems with different cultural expectations. And look, I think the Hustle are going to be ready. And I am tempted to pick them over, but I'm not going to. Because I think Chuba Benson Jaja understands that the Hustle going 10 and 2, 11 and 1 doesn't really matter that much. Like, obviously, they need to
Right.
make the playoffs, but this is a team that is going, they could go 12 and 0, and they're going to be judged by what happens in the playoffs.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's not me saying that they're not going to care about the regular season results, but I do think the combination of the fact that they have the toughest schedule in the history of the UFA and that they're adding these new pieces in and just there's a uncertainty. Will they have their young guys early in the season? How will guys that were away for a year like JP Burns and Tanner Robinson like
Kenny Taylor, shout out.
yeah, fit back in? So yeah, I as much as I would love to disagree with you, I am going to lean under for Atlanta. I still think they're probably the first place team in the South Division, at least the co-favorites. But
Yeah.
9-3 feels about right, so I lean under. Uh, let's just
One
stay
thing,
in the
one
South. Yeah, go
One
ahead.
thing I wanted to keep on Atlanta for a second. First off, you did a much better job of making my point for me about how regular season, I think, can be a bit of a mirage in terms of the success numbers as opposed to where teams end up at the end of the season. So thank you for that. And B, I was on the phone with Cameron Brock 3 nights ago, and he was driving back from his pod practices in Atlanta. And I think the biggest message takeaways from listening to him talk about his new experiences with the Hustle is the team culture is, I think, some of the best in the entire UFA. He just feels completely bought into the system. It's been a seamless transition for him adapting to this new team. And trusting my friend here, he seems to feel the same way about the new additions elsewhere. I think that is a credit to Benson Jaja and the rest of that Atlanta leadership of they've been investing in this team, the specific people that they surround themselves with for years. And that is something that comes off, I think, staggeringly obvious to all of us, right? And so I do think that while there are questions, the ability to adapt and move forward shouldn't necessarily be one for this Atlanta team because they've done it now a couple of times. They've had pretty significant turnover and interchanging the past few seasons and always kind of came out pretty shiny on the other end. So I do think that their culture will carry them through some of this adversity. The other piece might be time to start talking about Hayden Austin Nab in some MVP finalist conversations. I know we've all been high on the kid for a very long time, but it sounds like he might be ready to really put it all together. I mean, his stats have been there. He's been a fantastic player for the past couple of years, but I think if he can elevate just a notch, not even half notch up, and he can be kind of that co-superstar alongside Brett Hulsmeyer, another MVP finalist going into this year and probably one of the 5 best players in the world right now. I think that might be where Atlanta can find that new height, right? To your point about they're only going to be judged in the playoffs. They've needed that that somebody, right, to step up in those final moments and give them the push over the edge in these tight South Division championship games, and it just has come up so short. And man, if Hayden Austin Knabb can be that elevated person, I think like we saw in college when he made a push with Georgia, I'm here for it, man. Like that kid's got all the tools in the toolbox. It's right there. You know, I think it's the same thing we've seen with Atlanta and their championship hopes. It's right there. They just gotta take it a little bit more. But let's move on from Atlanta. Who you got for me?
Yeah, a year ago they went 10-2, and the two losses were to Carolina. They got the Flyers four more times. And remember, if they don't come back and win that crazy game against Dallas, the team that didn't beat anybody, like that was a game they probably should have lost. They found a way to win it in the waning moments, or Dallas found a way to lose it, or a combination of both. But yeah, let's go to the Carolina Flyers. They're the second highest over under in the South Division. 8.5 for the Flyers. They finished 9-3 last year. They finished 7-5 in 2023. Over under 8.5 Carolina.
Carolina's a tough one. They've been my Spurs team for a while. I feel like they've understood that the regular season numbers don't always need to add up specifically to make them into a contender. So I'm going to choose the under, but they're the most spicy team to me as far as a team that might get only 7 or 8 regular season wins. To me, this is still a Flyers team like they were last year that's capable of making another championship appearance. I mean, you look at their roster, you look at the core, you think about their culture. It's Carolina, damn it. Like, you're from there. You should be beating your chest a little bit right now. Like, this is a blue blood pedigreed program at this point. And until they have some real instability in that foundation, I just can't put my chips elsewhere right now, you know? Like, the offense is still going to be Fairfax, Terrence Mitchell, Elijah Long in the backfield, one of the most underrated possession handlers around. Xander Wilcox, who I think is still in college, 6'7" thrower with full field range on either side. That kid's still waiting to take another mini step. I mean, they're going to have a host of players that we haven't quite familiarized ourselves with. They'll probably emerge, and we're gabbing about them in the middle of the season. They've got their two young stars on defense, and Belis and Wellers another year. That defense for the Flyers last year, I think, was so underrated. They got so many different players and different types of defenders that they can put on people.
And yet you're going under.
Yeah, and I'm going under because, again, they don't care about the numbers as much. And I respect that about them, but I think that they might be a little comfortable again in that second seed, but who knows? They could also win 10 games too. Like, this is a team that could push to 10, 11 wins.
Yeah. So you didn't mention the biggest transition from last year to this year for the Flyers, which is their coaching situation. Mike DiNardo stepping aside. He's still the team owner. He's not going far, but Michael Aviles is stepping in. That is the only reason I lean toward the under, but I'm going to take the over. And here's why. I think they are not going to start the season miserably. And what I mean by that is their first 3 games at Atlanta, home for DC, at Atlanta. I think if Carolina can get just one win in those first 3 games, if they can start 1-2, then they can absolutely go 8-1 the rest of the way, and that would get them to 9 wins, which is over 8.5. The schedule the rest of the way, they have Atlanta twice at home, they have Austin twice, home and home, and then they have Philly, Pittsburgh, Houston a couple times. Like, I think Carolina could legitimately start the season 0-3 and finish 9-3. But I don't think they are going to start 0-3. I think they'll get at least one of those games, either at Atlanta or DC. So I just look at the pieces that they've got. I look at the culture that you mentioned and their young triangle insurgents that are building their way into the Flyer system. I lean over, and I obviously think that Atlanta and Carolina are going to be the class of this division and could both finish 9-3. They could go 2-2 against each other. and we could have another thrilling playoff game that comes down to keep away in the final moments with Ben Snell, who I don't believe is on the team anymore because I think he walked away after last year. Is Snell still on the team?
He is not. He is one of the
Okay,
departures.
yeah. Well, Snell called game last year, and maybe Elijah Long calls game this year. Who knows? We'll talk about playoff predictions another time. The
Just
third
one
team.
nugget. Just one nugget.
Yep,
Carolina started the 2021 season 0-2. You know what they went on to do? Win the title.
I do.
They finished in the wild card. They were 8-4. They had to go on the road in the first round to play DC, beat them, make championship weekend, beat Chicago, then New York, which could honestly be a little bit of foreshadowing for this year. Like that could almost be a similar path for the Flyers, not the DC in the first round because we don't have the super division of the Atlantic anymore, RIP. But just wanted to point that out to your very astute observation that this Carolina team, they could take a couple of gut shots in the beginning of the season and be just fine by the end. Again, the Spurs. They're the San Antonio Spurs. Sorry, I said Spurs earlier, and I'm such not a soccer fan, but now my brain's going, oh, Tottenham. Should have said San Antonio. I'm sorry if I confused any soccer hooligans and NBA diehards, but I'm always going to be referencing NBA. But back to you.
Xander Wilcox is big. He's not as big as Victor Wembanyama. But your point about the culture and just kind of, and look, the Spurs culture is about a decade old at this point, if not more. But I understand what you're saying in terms of their championship winning culture and their contention. Third team in the South Division. And maybe some folks are going to be surprised, but I don't have Austin. I got San Diego. Over under 7.5 for the Growlers. They have added a lot of key pieces. They are the only team now in the league that has had the same head coach for every year of their existence, not including the teams that arrived since the pandemic, because some of those teams have had the same coach as well. But, Kevin Stewart's been leading the way. They got Kayla Helton and Goose Helton helping out. They've got a lot of games against their rivals, the LA Aviators. A third of their schedules against Los Angeles, and the Aviators have lost a lot of pieces. So it feels like if the Growlers can take care of business in those games, that's 4 wins right there. Can they get 4 more wins the rest of their schedule and get over 7.5? Adam, what do you think?
I think 8 is a stretch. I think given the travel and still just the upward trajectory that they're climbing out of during this rebuild is a little too steep to really hit that nice 8-4 end of the regular season record. So I'm going to take the under. I'm going to go for a nice 7-5 record for the Growlers. But they're going to be frisky, man. I mean, the end of the season last year, Growlers were playing as well as any team in the West. They were younger than many of their counterparts. But Travis Dunn isn't going anywhere. He's one of the most reliable, productive scorers and offensive players in the league's history. He seems to keep extending his prime a little bit further and further every year. He's the quintessential, when's this guy going to turn down a little bit? Oh, nope, not this year. What was he, second last year in scores per game and like top 5 in yards per game? I mean, he's still dominant as ever. And now they've got more pieces around him. They've re-up some really nice additions, Marcel Osborne, Jesse Cohen. I think they're going to get more KJ Koo this year, who on a per game basis was one of the best offensive players last year. I think he only started 3 to 5 games. I'd have to go back and look.
What about Khalif? Do you think he's important for them?
I do think Khalif is important. It's just the matter of kind of like it was in 2021, where how much Khalif are they going to get and where will he be? Is he going to play on offense or is he going to be on defense, launching pulls and doing coverage? I think the biggest question for Khalif is just availability and then where they choose to utilize him. Obviously, getting a world's caliber player is a huge boon, and he has now championship weekend experience coming off of last season with Seattle. It's just, again, it's hard to know how these sort of free agency signings exactly fit in. And to your point about Stewart and kind of the continuity of this Growlers culture, God, I've used that word too many times already in this episode. But this team values consistency and sort of toughness, I think, above all else. And I think that's why you saw such a linear progression for a young team. And I don't know that that goes away this year. And so my big thing is, where can Khalif most leverage his outrageous skill set for them, right? I think all of the pieces are kind of there, and he can be kind of the, infinity gemstone of some kind where they slot him into a role and poof, now all of a sudden they do look like a legitimate contender of some kind, or to me, like what their ceiling would be like a 2023 Austin Soul, where they catch white hot towards the end of the season. Maybe they knock off Carolina or Atlanta in the opening round of the playoffs, and they just continue to surge into a championship weekend appearance. I think that's best case scenario. But I don't know. I think that they're one of those teams who's going to be the most interesting to follow this year because, again, of all those elements. They have a lot of consistency, toughness, coaching excellence. They've got stars. But how is it all going to fit together? And especially in this new arrangement in the South Division. One of the things that's kind of fallen to the wayside because it was announced so long ago in the offseason, we've got realignment this year. So how do the Growlers fit into this new landscape?
And that's a great point because the Growlers schedule is so different from years past. And with that said, they also have 2 games against the Spiders, both at the very end of the season, and they've got a game in Vegas. So, if you think the Growlers can go 4-0 against the Aviators, can split with the Spiders, can win in Vegas, that gets you to 6 wins. And they also have a home game against Houston that I think they'll be heavily favored in, at least going into the season with what we know now about the Havoc. So that's 7. If you think they're going to sweep the Aviators, I'm going to go under with you. I think that SoCal rivalry, part of me wonders if we're sleeping on the Aviators just a tiny little bit.
McDougal could lead the league in scoring this year. I mean, I think it might be his kind of final ride off into the sunset for the Aviators, but he's one of the league's best all-time scorers. He's coming off another fantastic season, and he's one of those guys.
I've got a thought.
Way up for these SoCal games, regardless of if he's playing for the Growlers or LA.
A thought I had earlier, Adam. Sorry to interrupt.
No, I never interrupt, Evan. You should definitely apologize more.
Is it wrong of me? I know you're an NBA guy. I thought of Sean McDougal before thinking about the Aviators, and I'm like, he could win any game he plays in. He could become the best player on the field that game and will his team to victory. But, he's going to have good numbers, but I don't expect his team to have a winning record. Is it wrong of me to think Sean McDougal is Zach LaVine in the NBA? Because, I don't know if you've watched LaVine this year with the Bulls and now he's on Sacramento after getting traded. He's had some unbelievable games that just make you be like, how is this guy not better, or how is his team not better? But then his team's record is what it is.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair especially with some of the athleticism and production numbers. You can just look at slash lines from LaVine and he's 50, 40, 90 guy a lot of seasons. And it's similar with McDougal. You look at his metrics and it's like, this is one of the best offensive players in league history, no doubt about it. And he can go play defense. He's one of the best defenders off of a turn if he's on an O-line. So I think that that's a very apt comparison. And I think I would actually give a little bit more credit to McDougal and kind of what you were saying. He can take over games and change the complexion. I think he did that when he was on the Growlers a couple years ago, and LA was more of the favorites. He went into those SoCal rivalry games, showed up and started talking to everybody. I mean, Sean's going to let them know, when he's going off, that mouth is going as fast as his feet. And so I think LA is back in the position where I always underestimate them, like you were saying a second ago, where I think, what do you have them? You have lines for every single team, so I just want to take a peek. You have LA at 2.5 wins. I'm smashing the over there. I might be wrong, but I like LA when they're kind of in this behind the 8 ball a little bit territory. That's traditionally, historically, where they've kind of excelled. So, yeah, LA could be a thorn in the boot of San Diego, but we got to move on from the South. We've spent enough time in the South. We got 3 other divisions. We got to keep moving.
You mentioned LA's line. The folks in Texas are going to be like, "What do you think about us?" We'll dive into the Soul and Havoc more on other conversations. Let's go to the East. Uh, the division that I think annually people consider the strongest, and I think in 2025 it has only gotten stronger with Toronto bringing in half of the European Ultimate Federation to play for them this year. Um, but Toronto's not at the top of the ledger. I've got both DC and New York with over unders of 9.5. So I'm going to
Mhm.
throw that at you as a duo. DC and New York, they've been paired for so long. They have, no team has represented the East other than those two since 2017. I guess New York had it locked up from 2018 to 2023 before DC finally, I was going to say beat them. They beat them in the regular season last year. They didn't have to beat them in the playoffs. Anyway, DC and New York, they're both over-unders of 9.5. Go.
I'm taking under on both. Again, we'll get to it at the end of this episode, but I think we need to start kind of tampering expectations for some of these super teams. I just think we're kind of getting at it in the abstract, but there's so many of them. We have two good teams at the top of each of these divisions. There's just not enough wins in the schedule to say they're all going to, inflate to 10-win powerhouses. So I'm going to take the under on both DC and New York. I think they've got pretty adverse schedules. I think New York is going to be dealing with a really phenomenal amount of turnover. I think that they're going to have a drastically different set of rotations. They've lost a majority of their starting defense, which was the backbone for much of their championship run in that historic 31 game win streak. So I'm tampering my expectations with New York. And with DC, look, every year, I think for the past 4, we can say, well, 3 especially, that they've been a championship caliber team. I think with them, it's similar to Atlanta, where they're kind of in a spot where they need to show it to me in the postseason. They can have some of the most glistening team metrics imaginable during the first 12 games, but what I want to see is, do they get Christian Boxley or Downey having a star performance to push them forward in the playoffs? Do they kind of not allow a less than perfect effort to get in their way? Because that's what happened to them at championship weekend last year. They let perfect be the enemy of good, and they fell apart midway through the first quarter against Minnesota. They allowed that win to get between their ears immediately and start affecting their play. This team is outrageously talented, and yet they lost their composure, 6 minutes of game clock into a semifinals game. I want to see what they do in more of, smash it out style ultimate games where it's not just precision passing. We know that that's DC's bread and butter, and we know if there's no kind of like external variables, they're one of the best, if not the best, possession-oriented franchise in this league's history. But to me, what they need to do better is manage games that maybe they feel like they should win, but don't do it in the way that they game plan or strategize or prefer. Because they just need to get some ugly W's. That's not traditionally what this Breeze team does.
So you haven't gone over on anybody yet. You are 5 unders
I
so
went
far.
over. I went over on LA. It's the year of the underdog, I guess, in my head. I could be completely wrong about this, but yeah.
I,
What about you in DC and New York?
I am tempted to go over for both. Here's the roadmap. They split with each other. They play each other twice. So they split with each other. DC has 3 games against Boston, but 2 of them are at home. New York has a home and home with Boston. They also both have 2 games with Toronto. DC has to go at Carolina, which is obviously a tough trip. New York has to play at Oakland, and we'll get to the Spiders, but I am really intrigued by the Spiders. The roadmap is basically they split against each other and each lose one other game among all those. I'm going to take the Breeze over and the Empire under. I think what we saw from the Breeze last year is that they are as consistent of an offensive team in terms of running their system against UFA defenses that we've ever seen. But Evan, they're losing their quarterback, Johnny Malks. I think you could argue that Jacques Nissen might be better suited for that Johnny Malks role than Johnny Malks was. And I understand how good Johnny Malks is. So that's how highly I think of Jacques and what I saw from him as a teenager and what I saw from him as a college ultimate player with Brown. I think he is ready to take the reins of that offense. And you mentioned his name already, but they get Christian Boxley back. And he was one of the best players in the league 2 years ago. Cole Jurek was one of the best players last year. Basically,
top 5 player in the world, Christian Boxley. Let's not cut corners here again.
Yeah.
Kind of in that upper echelon of this guy just changes complexions of games when he's on.
They lose Malks and they lose Elliot Bonet from their O-line. Bonet is sitting out this UFA season to focus on the World Games where he'll be playing for Team France, which is super cool and exciting as well. But we haven't even mentioned Rowan yet. I really like
Tyler Monroe. Say his name. Say his name. We need to say Tyler Monroe more this year. That dude, speaking of somebody as consistent and excellent as any offensive player in this league, he just grinds out there, man. Him and Jurek on that offense.
He's not a victim that I feel like I have to say his name. But yeah, I hear you. I like Tyler Monroe. By the way, happy birthday, Time On. He just turned 30 earlier this week.
Hey,
so happy birthday, Time On. And then you got DC's defense. I don't know what Aiden Downey's going to play, but my guess is he'll play D. And then you put him and Thomas Edmonds orchestrating a D-line that has, AJ Merriman and Troy Holland and Miles Grovick, who's one of the top young defenders in the league.
Holland isn't on the roster currently. I think
he's not.
I think he's going to be one of those might get added at a certain point, but for right now, he is not there. Just want to put that out there. Fantastic defender.
You can pretend to edit it out and then leave it in and make me look bad. They you know who is on the roster they didn't have last year? Alexandre Fall.
Yeah.
Take out Troy Holland and add Alexandre Fall, and the point still stands. Yeah, I like DC. I think they're going to be on a mission after what happened in championship weekend last year. I also think, clearly New York has had significantly more turnover than the Breeze have, just in terms of names coming in and names going out and infrastructure that has changed from last year to this year and really from 2-3 years ago to now. They've lost multiple MVPs. Their other MVP, Ben Yacht, is getting older. I'm really kind of curious what kind of season we're going to get from Ben Yacht, because I thought he lost a step last year. Obviously, he's still really good, but he's not dominant in a single-handed way that he once was. Now, if he wants to shove that in my face, I'd be delighted, because I'm rooting for Ben. I like Ben. I like his attitude. I like his swagger. He's one of the best players in the history of the league, but I saw him take maybe a half step to a three-quarter step back last year, and now there's going to be theoretically even more responsibility put on him to be one of the foundational pieces of that O-line alongside Jack Williams. So I think New York is slightly under, but like I've said on this podcast earlier, that I think they're the favorite in the league. And I think that thought is melding a little bit as I learn a little bit more in the preseason. But I still am high on New York, but I got them under 9.5. I think they're probably a 9-3 team.
Shout out to Lauren Boyle last year in her first season with DC. I felt like that was one of the more underrated coaching jobs in the entire year. I know she got some nominations, deservedly so, for Coach of the Year. But man, she took, a team with championship expectations already and brought them closer to it than any previous iteration in her first year. I think that's a tremendous accomplishment, and I think it's going to be really interesting to watch more and more of her identity as that head signal caller come out in the second season for the Breeze. So yeah, I think maybe we're just seeing where that team begins to go right now. But I want to get to your third team.
Yeah, third team in the East, the Boston Glory, over under 8.5. Now, yeah, go ahead.
I'm going over on this one. I'm going to jump in. I'm jumping in on this one. This is where I'm getting all razzly and excited. I'll go over on Boston. I don't like this. 8.5 wins for a Boston team that had, 9 last year?
Yeah,
they didn't
9
even
and
have
3 last year.
peace until after this recording. Do you realize how insane that is? I know we keep banging this drum, but they signed an MVP on April 1st, less than 4 weeks before the season started. And they still accomplished everything they did. Going back just a half second, you mentioned how DC didn't even have to play their closest rival, New York, in the East Division Championship game last year. And that's because Boston has this little man called Jeff Babbitt, who's basically a Hulk-level Avenger capable of just dispatching of teams like the Empire. So how do you have this Boston team at 8.5 wins when they've added way more talent over the offseason? They get Tob DeCrona. They get Ray Tetro back, arguably one of their best offensive players from 2 years ago, didn't play in 2024. They add Calvin Stoughton. They basically retain their entire roster from last year. How do you have this team at 8.5? Are you choosing over? Are you just setting up like the I'm going to pick Boston and yeah, I actually believe them to be 11 wins and Tom Brady's going to show up and kiss everyone on the mouth? Is that what you're doing here?
Well, Tom Brady's a little washed up. If Drake May showed up, then the glory would go over.
Why did I give you airspace to talk about the Patriots? I'm so stupid.
Drake May, Stephon Diggs in glory uniforms this year. Who says no?
Stop.
Come on.
Stop.
You're the one that brought it up.
I know.
I am gonna go under 8.5 for Boston. Why? They got 2 road games at DC and a home game against DC. They also have a road game at New York. They also have a road game at Toronto. When was the last time Boston brought its A team to Canada? I don't think it's ever happened. I don't trust Boston to bring their best in every road game yet. And I have reason to believe that they're going to be missing some pieces when they go to Canada and play Toronto. And now I'm forgetting if that rush game might be the second day of a back-to-back. I think they are they're this is good podcasting right here. Was I right about that? I'm looking at the rush schedule, not the glory schedule. I had the glory schedule pulled up.
Take your time.
Yeah, Wi-Fi is slow these days.
Okay, so you have Boston at 8.5. You've got Toronto at 7.5. You're taking Boston on the under. Are you taking Toronto on the over and saying that those two teams might both approach 8 wins? Again, I can't I don't have the time to go through and do all your math, but I'm looking at this East Division over-under win totals, and there's a lot of teams approaching 8+ wins here.
Yeah, well, I went over DC. I went under New York. I'm going under Boston. And I would go under 7.5 Toronto. I think they're a 6 or 7 win team. I was right, by the way. June 14th, Boston at Montreal. June 15th, Boston at Toronto. Mm-hmm. I'm worried about that game for the glory. And to go over 8.5, they would need to, let's grant that they, lose once in DC and once in New York and that game in Toronto. Then they need to win every game they play at home against those other top 3 and win on the road once at DC. And with the inconsistency that we've seen from Boston, I'm going to take them as an 8-win team. So that's why I go under on Boston. And I've already told you I've got Toronto under 7.5. I think the Rush are going to be vastly improved. But I also am worried in terms of going over on how consistent their roster is going to be. Like, are all the European imports going to be there throughout the season? I'm fairly confident they are not. I think there's going to be, they're going to have full strength squad some games, and they're going to have 15 of their top 20 other games, and I worry whether that's going to be enough. I also think that the Toronto-Montreal rivalry is real, and I think that the Rush, you can't just automatically pencil them in W against Montreal. I think they'll probably end up beating Montreal in those games, but I also think that the Royale are going to have a huge chip on their shoulder this year. No one's expecting much of them after they lose Toba. But aside from losing Toba, they have most of the rest of their team back. And I think Like I think the Montreal Royale are going to be with Philadelphia at the bottom of the East Division, but I don't I don't trust Toronto yet. Like if Toronto had their full roster all season long, 100% certainty, I would take them over 7.5. But I'm
Yeah.
going under.
But that's not how this works, and you know that. And I love your points about Montreal. They are going to be the angriest monkey wrench I think we've ever seen in this league. I don't know if they'll get to more than 4 wins on the season, but I think the 1 or 2 that they get are going to be phenomenal upsets. And I think you saw that very close last year. I mean, they played New York tight. They almost took DC in Montreal with a fairly full Breeze roster. Like this Royale team is not to be messed with if they can hit their peak game, and I think that they've got enough motivation. I've been hearing reports that Quinton Bonad is in his best shape, basically in his pro career, that he has just been hitting the ground running this offseason and looks to be phenomenal. Speaking of another French Worlds player, I think that Montreal could definitely knock off a Boston, knock off a New York in Montreal if they're not careful, and definitely, I think, complicate this new revamped Rush team that we're all so excited about. But
So you
let's
you got over
continue.
under for the Rush.
So you having them at 7.5. I'll also
Yeah.
take the under. I think I'm right there with you. I think a 6-7 win team. I just think the roster inconsistencies, the amount that they're importing, the lack of continuity, it's just a lot. And it reminds me a little bit of Dallas 2021, who I notoriously put at the top of the power rankings before the season began. And then you know what happened? They got knocked off by an Austin team that they had just pilfered all their talent from in like the second game of the year. And it just feels like Toronto could have a similar experience where, yeah, maybe they even get a game where the talent is there, but they can't quite figure it out. And Montreal has been a team that's been practicing, I think, throughout the offseason more thoroughly than just about anyone. And you know what? They have some pretty good defenders too. Christophe Tremblay-Jonca. Last year they had Raphael
He's
Lavand.
awesome.
He's amazing, and he was
Yeah.
out for a good deal of last year with a broken collarbone because he's such a frenetic defender that he laid out and broke it. He came back still and finished up the rest of the season with the Royale. He's fully healthy. I think he's a phenomenal two-way player on defense for the Royale. Like I'm right there with you with Montreal. I don't know where they're going to end up specifically in the standings, but I think that they're spicy. But we got to move on. We still got 2 more divisions, man.
We
So
do. We'll work through it. Just to recap, you and I agree on
mhm.
New York and Toronto under. We disagree on Boston and DC. I have DC over. You have them under. You have Boston over. I have Boston under. There's a recap. I'm sure someone will make a cool graphic, especially elevating the fact when we're wrong. Um,
Yeah.
you want to do Central or West next?
It's your choice, man. I'm just sitting here taking batting practice. Again,
All
pitch me
right.
what you got.
Well, it's interesting because in both the Central and the West, I got the top 2 teams in the division with the same over/under. Let's go to the Central. You know which teams they're going to be. Chicago and Minnesota. The number is 9.5 for both of them.
I'll take Chicago over, and I'll take Minnesota slightly under. I think Chicago is going to do what I said in one of the previous pods, where they might drop one, if not both, of their opening games. And then I think they might run the table after that. Because again, they only have 2 games before Labor Day, or before June, excuse me. So they're going to have plenty of time to slowly ramp up all of their new pieces. And I think that they have the benefit of their schedule as opposed to a lot of these other contenders that have added so much talent and have to hit the ground running. So I'll take Chicago slightly over at 10 wins, and I'll take Minnesota a hair under at 9 wins. How about you?
Yeah, I'm going to have to stay consistent with what I said. I stare at that Saturday, July 5th game, Chicago at Pittsburgh, 24 hours after they played Minnesota at home on the 4th of July, and what's probably going to be like the game for first place in the Central Division. I think that's a really tough back to back. And because of that, along with the first 2 games of their schedule, that I think there's a decent chance that they lose, I think Chicago's going under. I think they're probably way too talented to finish below 9 wins, assuming that they keep their team together throughout the season. But
Mhm.
I also don't feel like, like if they win that game against Minnesota and maybe that's Minnesota's third or fourth loss and Chicago's got the tiebreaker, like maybe Chicago takes its foot off the gas and maybe Pittsburgh desperately needs that game for their own battle for third place in the division. So I'm going to go under Chicago. I'm going to agree with you on Minnesota. I think, a year ago they went 9-3 during the
Mhm.
season.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean they've gone back and forth between 10 wins and 21 and 23, 9 wins and 22 and 24. So I mean 9.5 is the right number, and I think it's reasonable to expect Minnesota to be better this year than they were last year. Like I don't anticipate them losing that home game to Pittsburgh like they did last year. Um, the thing is, the schedule this year is a little tougher. I think they're underdogs even at home against Atlanta. I think they're probably underdogs at Salt Lake in July, but who knows what those teams will look like by then.
Let me
Man,
just
can I
let me just
can I
jump in
go
and
over?
yeah, go
You
ahead.
talk for a second. I'm going to see if I can talk myself into going over for Minnesota to disagree with you.
I'll say I'll conflict myself and argue with myself here, which is probably what I spend most of the time doing when I'm not recording these things. Uh, I think that Minnesota's strength will be the same as it was last year, and like you say, slightly improved. This roster balance. We talk about integrating youth and talent alongside veteran leadership and know-how, and man, this Windshield team has that so thoroughly on lock. I feel like compared to basically any other roster in the league. I mean, you have this, veteran core of DeClerc and Bevon and Colin Berry, Brandon Mattis, the coaching staff who has been there for countless years. And then, as you saw last year, these new talents that they are developing in the Minnesota area are some of the best in the league. I mean, Leo Sovel Fernandez, was one of the best rookie performers last year. Didn't really seem to be affected by the stage whatsoever or any game. He was productive. They have this guy, Cameron Lacey, one of the best pulling specialists in the league. He's only been playing Frisbee for a couple years. He's a fantastic athlete. I think this will be his third or fourth year playing the sport, and he seems to get better every year. They've got Gordon Larson, the reigning most improved player, the college teammate of Will Brandt, the reigning championship weekend MVP. They're both 25, 26 years old. I mean, you talk about under 27 talent or under 25 talent, and Minnesota is just loaded. And so I think that sort of roster makeup is going to be another thing that just buoys them along. And it wouldn't surprise me at all to see them push past 9.5
Yeah,
wins into 10.
I'm going to do it.
All right. Yeah.
I'm going over. Here's my rationale.
You going overboard?
Two games
Here.
against Chicago, one against Atlanta, one against Salt Lake. Do I think they can go 2-2 in those 4 games with 2 at home and 2 on the road? I do. I think the Wind Chill can go 2-2 in those games and 8-0 in the others. I think they've shown that they're not afraid of taking down the Radicals in Bree Stevens Field. I think they're not going to have another hiccup against Pittsburgh. I respect Pittsburgh. I think they're underrated, but I don't think they're going to have the horses. And the biggest name that I like on Minnesota this year that you didn't mention because it was like so far along way back in the offseason that he signed, Justin Burnett. He's young.
Hey.
He's hungry. He's a playmaker. Add him into that young core of 25 and under future stars, superstars. I do it because I like to be a contrarian a little bit, but I also I feel like I've disparaged Minnesota enough in terms of thinking about them relative to other teams and how surprised I was. I don't regret anything I've said, but I think for a regular season team, they went 9-3 last year, and there was at least one game that they lost that they shouldn't have. You could argue 2 with the Chicago home game that they also lost and just played miserably. So, yeah, I'm going to do it. Over Minnesota. I definitely will not pick them to win the championship, we're not making championship picks right now. I'm not going to pick them to go back to back, but I'm going to take them over. How's that for the Daniel Cohen hedge?
That's a good hedge. I like that hedge. You
Um,
know, the the tricky spot are the Madison and Pittsburgh lines that you have. So you got Madison at 7.5 and Pittsburgh at 5.5. It feels like you could flip those and it would also be fairly okay. I think obviously Madison being the 2 seed last year and having most of their roster back probably deserves that slight bump, but they're very comparable teams in my mind's eye, I feel like. So who do you have? I think maybe without talking about win totals, maybe let's sidestep that a bit for a second. Who do you have getting the 3rd seed in the Central? Because that's going to be just the storyline to watch throughout the season. Is Madison going to be able to kind of continue the progress that they showed last year, breaking their multi-season playoff drought? Or will Pittsburgh finally get back on the horse? They've shown glimpses, but it's been since 2019 since they reached the postseason. So what do you think about that 3rd seed in the Central Division?
it's a really hard question.
Yeah.
And I honestly, I think it comes down to this. The games that are against other teams is going to decide it. Madison has games in Texas against Houston and Austin. And Pittsburgh has 3 interdivisional games. They got Toronto, Carolina, and Philly. I lean towards Madison because of the history, the infrastructure, and that varying non-conference schedule. Like I lean towards thinking Madison goes 1-1 on that Texas road trip, whereas Pittsburgh probably goes 1-2 against those interdivisional games. But like Pittsburgh against Philly, it's no gimme game with that rivalry, and Philly's kind of had Pittsburgh's number in recent years too. So, I mean, if I can do this, I'm going to go under Madison 7.5, over Pittsburgh 5.5, but still lean toward the Radicals as the 3rd place team in that division, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're threading the needle there, but I'm kind of right there with you. I think Pittsburgh is a solid, if not great team. You know, they're gonna show up a lot. That offensive core, especially what they were piecing together last year with all those young guys, I think is really interesting. The thing with Pittsburgh is just can they slow down opposing offenses enough to make it a game? Because I think I mentioned this before. If they kind of play possession ball and limit total scores to 35 or under, 38 and under, they're going to be in a lot of games. But if it starts to balloon into a shootout, your comment a second ago rings into my head. They just don't have the horses to keep up with Minnesota if they're putting up 25 and doing run and gun. If Clayton's out there just beasting it downfield to maybe James Pollard, who knows? You know, like, yeah, I'm
Yeah.
right there. I think Madison will still make it into the playoffs. I'm just really interested to see what the offense will look like, particularly with another pretty headliner retirement in Pat Schreiwise, a franchise cornerstone for a number of years, who really was the facilitator in the mid space for the Radicals offense last year. He went down at the beginning of the game in the first round of the playoffs against Chicago, and that Radicals offense never really recovered. It was all pump and grind from that point out, even into their Central Division championship game against Minnesota. So I'm interested to see how that offense gets retooled this year. If they can find kind of the consistency that elevated them to 8 wins last year. We know the defense is going to be feisty and super aggressive in the counterattack, but everything else is kind of up in the air. All right,
So where does that leave you on Madison? You didn't say over or under.
I dodged it. Dang it, on their broadcast announcer. What do you think I was doing? Quickly under 7 wins. Moving on to West Division. Do not make me have to talk about the Radicals in depth there.
Okay. Are you going, you agree with me on Pittsburgh, or do you think they're more of a 4 or 5 win team?
I'll take a slight under there. I'm under all day, I guess. I'm limboing through these over-unders right now. I'll take a slight under at 5 wins because I think that Toronto game is going to be tough for them. And to your point, just getting interdivisional matchups can be tricky for some of these teams that are still in their developmental stages. You're going on the road, travel roster, and you got to deal with teams that are getting better and better. Like you mentioned the Texas road trip that Madison has to start their season at Houston, at Austin. That Madison Houston game is one of the most intriguing first 3 week matchups I think we have, because one team's going to go like this and the other team's going to go like this in my mind. Whoever wins that game is going to set themselves up for a phenomenal season in terms of their own expectations. The loser going to be working out from a little bit of a ditch. So
Yeah, it is an early measuring stick game for sure. Let's bulldoze through the West.
okay.
Top two teams in the West, as I said, have the same over-under. Which are the top two teams in the West? In the opinion of me, and me alone, in terms of these over-unders and perceptions and expectations, Colorado and Salt Lake, both with over-unders of 8.5 going into the season. Now, they had similarly high expectations last year, perhaps higher than 8.5. And Colorado went 6-6, their worst record ever. Salt Lake has been a double-digit win team all 3 years of their existence. They're 31-5 all time in the regular season, 10 wins, 11 wins, and 10 wins. What about in 2025, Adam? Summit and shred.
I guess I got to go over on something, right? And we're at our final division. So I'll take an over on Colorado's win total. I think that they get up off of the mat after last year's 6-6 team. There's still too much talent here. I think that they have a pretty favorable schedule in a lot of senses compared to some of these other contender teams. So I'll take Colorado for their offensive firepower. I'm obviously super high on Tobias Brooks joining that offense. I just think that they're going to be able to run the score up on a lot of the teams out west. So I like them there. Salt Lake, maybe my biggest enigma heading into this year. I just do not know what to expect from that team. They're going to be young. They're going to be athletic. But what is it beyond that that's going to be a part of their identity? I think that they're going to be a beast to deal with in the open field, again, because of that depth, that athleticism that the Utah State has been producing of late. But can they get a little bit caught up on their own system? That's kind of been the problem with the shred the past couple of years. They have all this talent, they have all the efficiency and numbers and sort of all the intangibles that you want, but something gets in the way of them in particular offensive scenarios. Like it just seems like the chain comes undone a little bit. So can they avoid those hiccups more this year? I think if they do, then I'm going to be proven wrong and they could ascend back to that 10-win plateau. But I think right now I'm going to rate them at about an 8. I want to see what Salt Lake is before I really get a sense of them, because another team that's just dealing with a massive amount of turnover, Grant Lindsley gone, Sean Cannell gone, Elijah Jaime gone. That's 3 of their top offensive producers. They're dealing with some pretty significant injuries too. Joe Merrill will not be playing this year. Their defense has had trouble staying healthy. They've got phenomenal talent there, but their starters aren't always able to endure the full 12-game regular season schedule, and that's impacted them. So I just want to see where Salt Lake kind of skews out in that first month of games before I really get a sense. Now, I think it's kind of wild that you have those two teams as the top win totals, and the reigning division champions up in Seattle are just sitting at 7.5 here on your sheet. I'm going to take the over there for the Cascades, and I've got to ask you, why the disrespect for Seattle? I feel like they finished in a really good spot last year. They showed that they can punch with the best. Obviously, they lose Khalif, and they lose a couple other pieces at the edges, but it's mostly the same roster returning. Seattle has one of the best youth pipelines. I think, if we get more games of Cedar Hines and Gavin Leahy, who are real spark plugs in that late season surge, those are 2 of the best young players in the sport. So why Seattle at 7.5? Are you just, again, going to set it up so you can take the over? I'm just interested in your thoughts.
I did not set it up for myself. I really think
it. Unless you do have a Vegas bookie. Do you have a Vegas bookie? We've got a Vegas team now.
Well, I am headed to Vegas in 4 weeks. I think it's about the schedule, Adam. I really think, looking at Colorado's schedule, they only have to deal with the Spiders once, and it is in Golden. Yes, they have Salt Lake twice. Yes, they have Seattle twice, home and home, but there's no Atlanta on Colorado's schedule this year. They don't have to go to Madison, Minnesota. They go to Texas, where I expect them to get 2 wins, but they'll at least get 1 win against Houston and Austin. I look at Colorado. I mean, I agree with you on Colorado, and I'm fighting my fingers as I say this because it's hard to imagine Salt Lake going from 31-5 the last 3 regular seasons to 8-4. But I think the strength of the West Division, I think teams are going to beat up on each other. And then you add in the fact that the Shred have games against Atlanta and Minnesota. Like, it's not unrealistic at all to think that a slightly weaker Shred team could lose to Colorado once, Seattle once, Oakland once, and one of those interdivisional games finish 8-4 and still be a really good team. And like, I also fully expect the Shred to have 4 guys that we've never heard of be really good for them this year. That's the Utah pipeline in a nutshell. Like, they are not featured coming up in college or high school ultimate necessarily, or perhaps we're just not following it closely enough. But knowing that pipeline the way I do, knowing Bryce and his coaching staff, I think they're going to be good, but I got them under. As for the Cascades, who you just asked about, the schedule they had last year was much easier than the schedule they have this year. This year, they go to Oakland twice. They also have Oakland once at home. The Spiders are good and legit. They have Oakland 3 times, Salt Lake twice, Colorado twice. They do not have San Diego. They got a couple games against Vegas and Portland that I think they'll probably handle easily. 7.5 is a tight number. I think just expectations are going to be different in Seattle this year. Like, they snuck up on people last year. They're not going to do that anymore. So I'm going to lean a slight under on Seattle. I think they're like, I mean, as the over-unders suggest, I think every team in this West Division is probably going to have 3 losses. I think, there's going to be a real battle in that 8-4, 7-7, or 8-4, 7-5, 6-6 range for teams trying to fight for a playoff spot. So I do think it's going to be really close, and that is where I lean. Do you want to throw in, where did I have Oakland? What did I have as Oakland's over?
6.5, which again, I don't disagree with it. I think I would sit right at 6-7 wins myself. So I'm gonna hedge on the Oakland one. That'll be my hedge. Can I take just the line? Can I just take 6.5 and do a push?
Who are they getting? Who are they getting their half win against?
Right, that's what I'm saying. They're like the biggest push to me here, where it's like I don't want to choose on either side of that. I think it's right in between 6 and 7 wins. I think you make fantastic points. I think Colorado not having that trap game in the Bay to face Oakland is huge for them. They've dropped it each of the past 2 regular seasons, and I think it's been a real shin kick for that Summit team. I think it's a game that, given their level of talent, they expect to win, and when they don't get that, they get a little inside their heads. So I think removing that from their schedule is going to be huge, especially with Oakland looking to be a little bit more improved this year with the revolver additions that are incoming. And I love your point about Seattle. They were the underdog last year. They got to operate from a position kind of incognito in terms of their full talent until they really ramped up after that Week 10 win against Colorado that effectively clinched them a playoff spot. But that was a 1-goal win that required Tommy Lee to get a layout goal in the final 10 seconds of regulation. It wasn't some sweeping victory for the Scades. So yeah, I think I'm aligned with you on the idea that Seattle will have a tougher time defending their West Division throne from the top as opposed to coming at it from underneath. I just still see what they accomplished last year. I see how much young talent that they have that's still developing. I mean, Zeppelin Ronig scored 50 goals last year. He might do better this year. He's one of the best developing wide receiver ones in the league right now, and he's not anywhere close to his prime. As I mentioned before, they've got Leahy and Hines, who are going to be only better this year. They were teenagers last year. They're going to be better. They're probably going to do what we've talked about with Boston and Minnesota and elsewhere, where they'll find some youth element that we haven't quite heard of. Same with Salt Lake, where you were mentioning about, like someone's going to appear on this team and just outperform our expectations. One of the big absences, I will say, for Seattle is Jasper Dean, who did pulling, was an all-rookie mention, and was, I think, got some votes for all-defense as well. Big, lanky defender. He was so good for them in so many spots. Can they get another one of him? Can they elevate kind of a player to a position and a role where we're not necessarily familiar with their game, but by the end of the season, it's like that guy is absolutely contingent to this team's winning.
Look, Seattle's one of my favorite teams in the league. They're super fun. They're super interesting. I think they're not going to sneak up on people, as I said. As for the Spiders, I love their offseason moves. I'm curious what they look like under new leadership. That's something we haven't talked too much about, but Caleb Merriam taking over for the Spiders. And look, they begin the season at home against New York and then at Seattle. Are they staring at 0-2? I know they won at Seattle in the regular season last year by a goal, but they lost in the playoffs. They split their regular season meetings, each winning on the other home field. I still think you got to look at it like the teams at home who has an advantage. And I mentioned how the Spiders only get Colorado once. That is in Colorado. I think the Spiders over-under is going to come down to those last two games of the season against San Diego. And my gut says that the Spiders are a slight tick above San Diego. So I will go over for the Spiders after going under for the Cascades and under for the Shred. I think you legitimately got four teams for three spots in this West Division. And let me just say one more thing about Colorado. It is a really nerve-wracking over for me because I don't trust it. This is how I feel, kind of similarly to how I felt last year, and we know that how that panned out. At the same time, their schedule being easier this year, and the reinforcements that they've added. Now, they've also lost a bunch of key guys, especially on defense. You talk about Cody Spicer 2 years ago. Agee and Tatum are nearly as big of a loss as Spicer last year, but I like the youth that they've got rising up. I like the UFA veterans that they are bringing in that can mix in, like Lawrence and Van Dusen and obviously Tobias Brooks, as you mentioned. So, yeah, that is why I lean over for Colorado and over for Oakland. But again, I these are all marginally confident selections. And look, that's part of the fun.
Man. We're in the preseason. We haven't even hit the ground yet. There hasn't even been a disc in the air. This is all very marginal to me.
Yeah.
I mean, you could probably flip half of these and end up sounding just as smart as we do. Typically.
So I know we got to wrap up soon, but an idea I had for a segment was Adam Ruffner's rough take of the week, where you throw out a take that could be construed as rough. Are you on board for sharing your rough take of the week?
Yeah, like the beard. Yeah, I am. I got one for this week. One of the Blue Bloods, one of the top two predicted finishers in each of these divisions, one of those 8 teams is going to have a disaster season or is going to fall way short of expectations. I just think we have spent so much time and energy hyping up how all the good teams got better, how everyone seems to be improving, and there's just only so many wins to be had in a given schedule. And so I think that one of these kind of championship contender teams is going to slip on a banana peel, so to speak. I think that either roster consistency, injuries, something is going to undo one of these team sweaters. They're just not going to be able to put it all together in the way that we want. I don't know quite which teams. I have some idea.
Come on. Be bold.
I think, all right. I think New York is a big candidate for that. I think they have all the talent in the world. But again, you mentioned it not too long ago. They're going through some systemic changes. They were going through it right before the beginning of last year. And look at how unstable that Empire campaign felt. I think that they're going to have a lot of new identities in both offensive and defensive roles, which is always something to work through. I still think that they're sussing out exactly what their coaching staff is, which is something that was juggled around a lot throughout last year. So with all of that uncertainty, and with, again, the tide rising in the East, Toronto got better, DC got better, Boston got better. I don't know if New York can hold on to the 8, 9, 10 wins that we are so accustomed to seeing them from them. It reminds me a little bit of that 2017 year, the first year that Ben Yacht started playing for them, when they had what seemed like division-winning talent. What'd they finish? 7-7, missed the playoffs. You know, they had the Twin Towers, in Yacht and Babbitt, and it just didn't really amount to much. You know, like
that'd be a really interesting oral history of that really mediocre, bad Empire season. Looking back on it now, because there are a lot of folks that may not know, like, all the drama that they endured. Just kind of because that was one of the outlier weird seasons from hell that any team has had with high expectations. That's a really good point and would make an interesting retrospective.
And then I think the other team that could throw kind of a lot of confusion into what we're kind of prognosticating here is Oakland. You know, we haven't spent a whole bunch of time on them. They were a good team last year. They didn't have a whole bunch of expectations. They didn't really headline a lot of top matchups. They're a really solid team. That offense has tons of playmakers. Evan Magsick made an all-UFA team, one of the best high-volume throwers. Raquan Atkins, one of the most exciting young receivers. They get more talent around those guys. The defense, too. They need to get better performances, but the parts are there. I think the system needs to catch up a bit, but they have the sort of horses to put some good coverages out there, and they can produce turnovers at a fairly good clip. You know, I think we have in our minds a little bit that the Spiders aren't good defensively. They were right around top 10 last year in terms of break scores per game, defensive efficiency. If they get a little bit better this year, what does that look like for Colorado, Salt Lake, and Seattle? So, you know, I think that there are enough teams right now equipped with the talent to kind of come up from under in a similar way that Seattle did last year, that we're just not going to be able to hold true to, all right, these are sort of the cornerstones that we are familiar with and expect to have coming into the playoffs, like we've kind of had the past few seasons. I think last year we started to see some of the parity breakthrough, and I think this year there's going to be more. You know, I think we've just spent so much time hyping up all of the additions that when rubber meets the road, there's going to be a lot of tough reality for these teams to face.
No doubt. The Over-Under podcast is over. But this was fun. This was fun conversation.
Yeah.
And yeah. I do think it'll be interesting because, like, look, you and I think, while we have our own opinions, we are both attempting to share our own personal points of view and trying to kind of present the public perception, which is often wrong. So it is up to the teams to prove us wrong going forward. And that's what is fun about this whole competition thing that we got going here in the Ultimate Frisbee Association.
I'm going to disagree with you there. I hope they prove us right. I don't want to eat any more crow. I've eaten enough crow, man. I'm prepared to eat more, but, like, I'm good. I'd like to see some of these teams prove me right. But
you picked everybody under.
What do you think? I'm hedging. That it sets them up for success. Oh, look, I was wrong, and you did even better. But I'll do it for this episode of Swing Pass. Evan and I will be back with you next week to talk about more preseason content as we barrel towards the beginning of the 2025 season on April 24th. Again, you can check out the new look team jerseys for the 2025 season. You can start getting excited if you want to watch some Ultimate. Head on over to Watch UFA TV, get your subscription set up. There are promotional offers to help with new subscribers for trial week, so you can look back on some of the greatest games from the past, from last year. But again, that'll do it for this episode of Swing Pass. We'll be back with you soon. Bye for now.